Welcome back to Game Set and Chat. Today we speak to Head of Parasport of Loughborough University, Nik Diaper. First of all, welcome Nick. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks, Ed.
So first of all, what's your story? For the people that might not know who you are, what's your story?
So I guess like most people who work in sport, I always had aspirations as a young kid. I was very sporty. I used to do a lot of swimming, swam competitively. I grew up in Kenya, so I swam for Kenya, represented Kenya at Commonwealth Games and World Championships. And through my sporting interest, and I should say I was a very average swimmer at best. I should clarify that.
Doesn't sound that way.
But genuinely a pleasure to represent my country at a fairly young age. But my swimming career came to an early end when I was probably 21, because for me education was always going to be the priority for me. So I guess I was in that situation like many athletes find themselves, of trying to balance the two. But coming from a country that didn't have any sort of formal pathway or funding structures to allow you to continue your athletic aspirations outside of an academic setup, there was never an option for me to continue swimming beyond that point.
Was that an easy decision then?
It probably was, because like I said, I was a very average swimmer. So I think everything that I had probably wanted to achieve as a swimmer in terms of basically to represent my country, I had probably achieved. And while I could have probably got a little bit better, there was probably a little point in me continuing down that path, because it was never going to go further than a certain point. Yeah. But I think what that sparked in me as a young person, kind of growing up in the world and wanting to know how I could improve myself as an athlete, I went down the route of studying sports science at university, and so a role working in sport was always something I was interested in. I sort of always knew that if I couldn't be sort of at the top level myself, how could I support others to do that?
That sounds familiar.
Yes, I think that's a familiar story for many of us, isn't it? So,
So what brought you over here? What brought you? What took you away from Kenya?
So I left Kenya. I did my A-levels in Kenya, and I came to university in the UK. I studied at Manchester Metropolitan University. Did my undergraduate in sports science and specialising in exercise physiology, and then also stayed on to do my a master's in exercise physiology, because I think I recognised at the time that the way the industry was going, probably a master's degree would be something I needed if I wanted to work in the field that I did.
Yeah. So your role at the university is head of parasport. How did you get to this point? What's your journey from a master's to head of such an illustrious university that does so much for parasport?
Purely accidental, I should say. I mean, I when I was at university, so I finished my master's in 2004. And although I started working in parasport in 2002 during my time at university, until that point I had no knowledge of parasport. I didn't really know anything about the Paralympic movement. I had never worked with para athletes. I had no sort of personal experience or anyone that I knew with a disability. So I would say I was very, very ignorant, is probably a fair word, of just what parasport was. Yeah. And it's definitely not what it was then. It's not what it is now in terms of the movement. So I remember back then in 2002, it was nowhere near where we're at now. So my entrance to Paralympic sport came purely by accident, because an academic member of staff at the university that I was who ironically happens to also be here at Loughborough now.
Okay.
Professor Vicky Tolfree offered me an opportunity to get involved with some work she was doing with the GB wheelchair tennis squad at the time. And I'm happy to admit that I'd never heard of wheelchair tennis before, and I didn't even realise that people played tennis in wheelchairs. But something in my head said, listen, you've got to say yes to that opportunity, because there isn't anything else. And I knew that getting some sort of applied experience alongside my time at university was going to be important. So I guess it was purely accidental, and it was probably a case of being in the right place at the right time, and somebody to ask me that opportunity. But also having the courage to say yes to something that, in all honesty, I was a bit unsure about whether it was the right thing to do.
Absolutely. So you mentioned that you've sort of been involved in parasport for numerous years. What's changed from then when you first got into it to now? What's changed?
Yeah, so I think I'm now sort of almost 20 years working in elite Paralympic sports. So my first Paralympic Games was 2004 in Athens.
Right, wow.
And I've been part of the British team as a support staff member from 2004 until now. So Tokyo was my 7th Paralympic Games, including Winter Games as well. I think the big thing that we've seen change is just how global the Paralympic movement has become. And I think the word movement is important, because for me what makes parasport and Paralympic sport different to Olympic sport, as an example, is it is a movement. So yes, fundamentally, it is about athletes being the very best they can be and elite sport. So it is sport as everybody knows it and wants it to be, and high-level sport at that. But much higher than that is this movement around the message, I think, that parasport or Paralympic sport sends to the world. When you look at the games once every 4 years, it is an unbelievable celebration of the human being, basically. So para-athletes, fundamentally, they want to be known as athletes. They want to be recognized first and foremost as athletes. But I think many athletes also recognize that parasport is such an amazing vehicle to inspire change, to change the way people think, to create healthy conversations about disability. When I first started in parasport, I guarantee you most lay people in the UK wouldn't be able to name more than one Paralympian. Whereas now, you know, you've got household names of your Ellie Simmons, your Johnny Peacocks, you know, your Kadina Coxes, all of those household names that by rights are household names, and they're encroaching into sort of mainstream media because they're doing Strictly Come Dancing and sort of mainstream shows, which is brilliant to see because that level of diversity is important.
We're really proud actually to have the partnership with Loughborough University. But what does this university do for parasport? Is it obviously sort of historically it's been known for all types of sports and levels, but what does it do for the parasport athletes?
So I mean, I started my role in almost 3 years ago now, and before I came into the role, there wasn't a formal parasport strategy. So the main basis of my role is to develop a parasport strategy at Loughborough. And yes, Loughborough has an international reputation for being one of the best universities in the world for sport.
Absolutely.
And I think what we want to make sure is that we're also recognised as being the best university in the world for parasport, because we want an integrated offer. And that's true at the elite level. So we want to create opportunities and pathways at the university for elite para-athletes to come in from whichever country they represent, because we are an international institution. So we want them to have eligibility to have access to scholarships, to coaching, to facilities, to basically all the opportunities that non-disabled students would have. But really, really important that we don't just focus on the elite end. In fact, it's probably arguably more important that we focus on as much as well on developing inclusive opportunities for everyone at Loughborough University. Because we have a student population of 18,000 people, and we know that about 15% of that will declare a disability, not always a physical disability, and I think that's important to note. Not all disabilities are always physical or visible. And we just want this amazing sort of inspirational, diverse environment at Loughborough where anyone with a disability, whether they're a student or staff member, can get involved in sport.
So what's your ambition? Is it that you want the Paralympics to compete in terms of media, in terms of coverage with the Olympics? Is it that you want to sort of spread awareness of what these unbelievable athletes can do? Is it all about winning? What's your sort of goal, or what's your vision for parasport at the university?
I think the vision at the university is it's definitely not winning. I mean, winning is a part, because when you win, you get profile and you get reputation and you get sort of a platform to promote a message. I think personally, like, my driver is I look at the world and I see a world that is designed by non-disabled people. And so if you are a person with a disability, the thing that is disabling you is not necessarily your disability itself. It is the way that the world thinks, because if you're non-disabled, you think like a non-disabled person. So a good example is when a non-disabled person designs a building, they will inadvertently exclude disabled people from accessing that building. Put in steps and obvious things like that. That's a very obvious example. There are much more subtle examples where just the lack of inclusive thinking creates barriers for society. So we end up seeing disabled people effectively marginalized, not just in sport but across society. When you look at disability representation next time you watch commercials on TV, how many times will you see a disabled person in an advert or in a movie or in a high-level leadership role in sport? How many disabled coaches do you see out there? So that underrepresentation comes from this non-disabled view of the world. And ultimately what I want to do is try and break down some of those barriers, because parasport is the vehicle that helps people understand how to be more inclusive and, like I said earlier, talk about disability in a healthy way.
Absolutely. I think that's something that's really important to us at the minute within our schools, is that It's something that we are desperately trying to sort of level the playing field in terms of that. But you've got big ambitions for parasport at the university, and you must have a very a sort of wide body of team that you work with. For those sort of students that potentially are really interested in this side of sport, but they maybe not get to a stage where they're going to compete full time or professionally, what sort of qualities would you look for in a team to help those students reach their dreams or their goals?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's lots of general qualities that I admire in people. I think, humility is always probably one of my fundamental things that I'm always looking to work with people who are humble. And even if we've won, or been unbeaten, like there's no excuse for not being humble, like because things can change very, very quickly. And I think especially when you work in parasport, like you need to remain humble because your personal circumstances could change overnight. Like that's one thing I didn't say is a lot of people who are non-disabled kind of live with this concept that they will never become disabled or that disability only happens to other people, when in actual fact, and heaven forbid it doesn't happen to anyone listening, but life is full of unknowns, and today or tomorrow or the next day or your family member or somebody will probably develop a disability at some point. So it isn't this sort of binary thing where there's an us and them culture. Like it's all of us, and it's very normal. But coming back to the point, the question you're asking me is, over and above humility, I think the people who I like working with, especially in the parasport space, they buy into or they want to be part of what I said before, the movement. So parasport is not just about sport, and it's not just about winning medals. It is about what you can do, and this will sound soft and fluffy, but genuinely to make the world a better place. Because by doing so, you're challenging perceptions of disability or you're creating opportunities. And really that can only be a good thing. So like, I don't get out of bed every morning to help someone necessarily to win a medal or that type of thing. Like I want to get out of bed every morning to know that I'm contributing to something bigger. Do you know what I mean?
No, absolutely.
And if that is like somehow in a very small way, shape or form making the world a better place through parasport, then that gives me some sort of personal sense of satisfaction.
And I think a lot of our sort of elite athletes that we have within our schools could probably, if they get to a stage where they are in a position of a professional or a full-time sport, they could take that into their minds. It's very interesting what you say.
The other point to add, I think, as well, is the way that I've seen sport develop, especially in the UK, but I think it's a global trend, is there's a growing trend towards inclusion and integration. So anyone out there who is currently an athlete, let's say you're an athlete in athletics, if the further you go down that pathway, it's more than likely at some point you're going to end up in a training group with someone who's a para-athlete. Not because you'll compete against them, but in your training group, your coach, hopefully, will be working with both para and non-para athletes. Or if you're someone who goes and works in sport as an industry, let's say you want to become a strength and conditioning coach with swimming as an example, the way it's going, it's more than likely you will work with para and non-para swimmers as a practitioner. So I think that's a positive step forward. And again, it's a reminder to people that we've got to move away from this us and them, or para-athletes go over there and non-para happens there. We are moving to a point where everything will hopefully become integrated, and we should be welcoming that and celebrating it.
I think we can take a lot from what you're saying, actually. The words, that might sound a bit daft, but you're very inspirational in the way you talk about parasport. I can see it's very close to your heart, which is brilliant. We always finish our episode with our last question is what sort of advice would you give to your younger self? So we have a young audience who are at a stage where they have got a lot of choices and a lot of options. If you could have your time again, would you do anything differently? Would you change your route? Is there anything at all that you think you would?
I wouldn't change my route because I love what I do, and you can see that the passion I have for it. I think
absolutely
it's a really interesting question, and I'll come back to something I said before, is if I could grab my younger self and shake him around the head and say, hey, do something, it would be that just stay humble. Because you just don't know when your personal circumstance can or will change, and at some point it will change. You could be top of the world 1 minute, but one thing that's guaranteed, you're not going to stay there. Whether that's your professional career or your sport career or your personal circumstances, like something's going to change. So stay humble and don't judge people until you truly understand what's going on in their world.
Yeah.
I think we're very, especially now on social
Yeah,
media,
like that.
everyone's quick to just fire off a tweet or an Instagram or whatever without having any awareness of what's happening in that person's life.
Yeah.
So yeah, it would be those two things.
No, I like that. We do actually do a bit on social media and how things can crop up from a younger age. But that's brilliant. The way you talk about parasport is genuinely really inspirational. So thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure.
I really appreciate it.
Thanks.